Good evening. Well, it was a weekend of light southerly winds in the English Channel, and that meant, well, of course, the crossings were back on. Have a look at this video that was taken on the early hours of Sunday morning. Well, there we are. There's a large group of very boastful young men, all without documents, coming into the United Kingdom. But we have to be fair, the French do actually try and stop the boats. Have a look at this, where they set fire to one of the dinghies, and there it is, burning away on the sand on the beach. So they do stop some dinghies, but the problem is the people that were in that dinghy will be back the next calm day in another dinghy and make the attempt yet again. So over 1,000 young men have already crossed the English Channel so far this year. And given we've only had 4 days when it's been possible to cross, you can see there is no sign of this stopping. Now, I personally believe we need to rethink the English Channel crisis. I think we need to absolutely rebrand it as a national security crisis. Tens of thousands of young men coming into our country, often from places that are not even friends of ours, often from war-torn areas, without documentation. We've no idea whether some of them were even fighting for ISIS in Syria. I think this is a question of national security, and that is the right approach going forwards. But none of that would impress the Archbishop of Canterbury. Here he was in the House of Lords earlier on this afternoon.
We can, as a nation, do better than this bill. With this bill, the government is continuing to seek good objectives in the wrong way, leading the nation down a damaging path. It is damaging for asylum seekers in need of protection and safe and legal routes to be heard. It is damaging for this country's reputation, which it contradicts even as late as last week, where the Prime Minister himself spoke eloquently on the value and importance of international law for this country. It is damaging in respect of constitutional principles and the rule of law. And most of all, my lords, it is damaging for our nation's unity in a time when the greatest issues of war, peace, defence and security need us to be united.
Well, the Archbishop Justin Welby there raises one or two, I think, really rather important questions. He talks about unity. I tell you what, Archbishop, if there was a referendum on this, there would be real unity, because a very large majority would say that those that cross illegally shouldn't be allowed to stay. They shouldn't be coming via this route. But he says we can do better. And yet, I don't hear him offer any alternative whatsoever. In fact, when I hear the Labour Party and others saying we can do better than this, all they ever talk about are cracking down on the criminal gangs in northern France. But the problem is, these people in a calm week in the summer can make between 2 and 3 million euros per gang. And it seems to me, however tough you crack down, when there are financial incentives as big as that, they will continue to traffic people across the English Channel. So let me ask you, can we do better? Farage at GBNews.com. And I don't honestly think we will do better unless, as I say, firstly, we redefine this as a national security crisis. And secondly, in line with that, we say that the European Convention on Human Rights is 70 years old, out of date, has changed its purpose, and we no longer wish to be a part of it. Because I don't see with that, even if this legislation does go through Parliament, I just don't see British courts allowing deportations. Now, the House of Lords will vote tonight on what is the second reading of this bill, but it looks like we could be about to enter a game of parliamentary ping-pong. What does it all mean? Well, Christopher Hope, GB News' political editor, joins me. So the House of Lords tonight, listening to the speeches, is going to vote against the Rwanda Bill, isn't it?
Second reading should go through, actually.
Should it?
Labour are unlikely to oppose, Lib Dems will oppose, and others might. And the numbers are so unclear because, of course, the government has around 40% of the peers there, and there's a big chunk of crossbenchers. They go where they feel they need to go, and that's meant to be the power of the second chamber, that it's not really biddable by any one individual party. Labour also don't have a majority, by the way, either themselves.
No, sure.
So that's why it's meant to be an important revising chamber.
Welby said he wouldn't vote against this as the second reading.
Yes, it's the amendment. So watch out for the amendment. It's when they start like a Christmas tree, they'll hang these baubles off it to weaken it and almost make it fall over. It will go back to the Commons then when it gets to there, probably around March, April, and then it's up to the Tory left are important there because they're for the government, because they're the ones, if they can re-strengthen the bill, they'll be going against their own views on that. So it could be quite interesting on going around the other way, I think, if it comes back.
And then when it comes back to the House of Lords for the third and final reading...
Well, you say final because the Lords must accept the changes made by the Commons. And because the Commons, second and third reading in the House of Commons, 40-plus MPs backed it. That's a big majority. The Lords, by convention, shouldn't refuse to accept it.
But they will argue, the Lords could argue, that this wasn't explicitly in the Conservative manifesto.
Well, it wasn't. I mean, it wasn't in there. You know jolly well. You're active in politics at that point. No, it wasn't. So the Salisbury Convention won't apply. This can go on for a year. Yeah. No one thinks it will, though, because the scale, the convention is, Nigel, the scale of that majority at the second and third reading should mean it shouldn't be obstructed.
But it still could be.
Still could be. And the names out there, 70 peers speaking today, voting about 9:30. David Blunkett calling it frankly ridiculous. Lord Blunkett, former Labour Home Secretary. Lord German, Lib Dem, saying it puts the UK at risk of breaching our commitments under international law. Lord Ponsonbury, Labour Shadow Home Affairs spokesman, making the same point. Your point about international law is understood, and that's where it's going. Maybe do we end up by some commitment to, in a smaller way, withdraw from the ECHR? Certainly that's what Kemi Badenoch was saying on GBNews yesterday.
And it does seem to me, Chris, quite difficult to think that many flights to Rwanda will take off before the next general election.
I've got a notional pint of beer on this, Nigel, which I don't think before May. They might go before the November election. Some, a few hundred, no more.
OK, so you think when it finally comes back to the Lords for the third reading, they're likely to accept it. There's no guarantee. They're likely to accept it. And let's say that bill then becomes an act of Parliament. It gets the King's assent and it becomes law. But we then face a slightly separate problem, don't we? That there's something called the courts. And there could be legal challenges to say that what Parliament has passed runs in contradiction with international treaties that we've signed. And this could ultimately go to the Supreme Court.
And at that point, we then invoke what Rishi Sunak told GBNews 10 days ago. They would not allow a foreign court in his term to overrule Parliament. You know, critics of him would say it's not a foreign court, it's based in Strasbourg, but of course it's a court we all sign up to in the international community.
Interesting. Chris Hope, thank you very much indeed for explaining that to us. Now, is it right that the Archbishop of Canterbury gets involved in an issue like this? Of course, we all want moral guidance and leadership from the head of the established church. Shame we didn't get much of that during the pandemic and lockdown, but hey. But here, is he dabbling in politics? Is he going further than he needs to go? And I wonder what Dr. Gavin Ashendon, former chaplain to Queen Elizabeth II, makes of all of this. Gavin, as ever, welcome to the programme. Is Justin Welby becoming a turbulent priest?
Well, no, that's a very honourable phrase and used by Becket against Henry II, and the struggle between the two of them was an entirely different kind. The trouble is, what Justin Welby is becoming is a left-wing politician, or has become a left-wing politician. You're quite right in saying that the moral guidance, the moral issues here are enormously important. When I was a child learning mathematics, we were told that it wasn't important only to reach the conclusion, but you had to show your workings to show you'd actually understood the problem. And there isn't any evidence at all that the Archbishop understands the problem, because we never see any of his workings. What we hear is some sloganizing that comes from the left of the political spectrum. But there's no sense that he's trying to balance the interests of, for example, the people he has primary responsibility for here, who have educational needs, health needs, needs of social cohesion, and against the needs of those who are coming in. In fact, we learn very little of the needs of the people who are coming in. We don't know where they're from. We don't know what they've fled from. We don't know why. We don't know why they come. They hide the evidence, and so it's very hard to trust the Archbishop when he simply gives us slogans but doesn't show any understanding of the complexity of the moral working through that we need to have to make a decision.
Yeah, I also note this phrase, we can do better. And yet, I'm not hearing any alternatives from him whatsoever.
One of the things that's frustrated all of us who are trying to see both sides of the moral coin is that we can't find a solution. And it's perfectly clear to everyone of common sense that the reason the government have chosen the Rwanda solution is not because Rwanda is a very sensible place to send anybody, but because you have to send a signal out that dents the confidence of the people breaking the law to come in, that they can be guaranteed a place here. And there are other signals going through, including our over-generous welfare system and the promise of employment by the government. So there needs to be some kind of signal to say this is not an automatic freebie, and that's the purpose of the Rwanda solution. It's a pro tem means of sending a different signal in the hope that if the signal bites at all, that the people who run these gangs will stop. So nobody pretends it's the ideal solution, but the Archbishop doesn't seem to understand the semiotics or even the politics of the thing. He simply trumpets slogans, and they're not very clever ones, and they don't help anybody.
Gavin, a final thought on a Christian point, if I can. I mean, clearly Christians want to help those in need. Where do we draw the line in terms of genuine refugees? And we have a long history in this country, don't we? Go back to the Huguenots, Jewish people, Ugandan Asians, etc. And I've no doubt there are some people coming in, who genuinely would qualify as refugees. And we've opened up, of course, to Hong Kong, to Ukraine. 500,000 people legally have come as refugees since 2016. Where, as a Christian, do you draw the line as to what we can acceptably do or not?
I remember being a young man and being very struck by homelessness and being very upset. I even asked a homeless couple into my house once, which was a terrible mistake because they wouldn't go. But the problem with these moral decisions is you have to have information. You need to know you need to be reasonably well informed of the difficulties these people face in order to know whether you have the resources to help them and the best way to help them. It's not obvious that the way to help people in trouble is not always obvious. And I think the difficulty with the refugee crisis is I can't answer your question because one can't do it in general. One has to do it specifically and say these people or these kind of people, we have this information about them and we know we can help them and dovetail help in a certain way. And again, that's one of the problems again with the Archbishop's position is he makes no distinctions at all between the different kinds of people who are coming in and the needs that they bring. And it's this lack of information and lack of distinction that makes it suggest he's political sloganeering and not doing his job as a leader of the nation, giving us moral criteria to help with.
Strong words, Gavin Ashendon. As ever, thank you for joining the programme. And they were very, very strong words. Basically, the Archbishop is delving far too much into politics.